So looking at China during this interwar period, going into World War I, they had just overthrown the last of the Chinese dynasties. The Qing dynasty had been overthrown, and now they were looking to reestablish order. However, there was a huge power struggle in this quest for order and stability. And you had groups like the nationalists who wanted to try to reestablish order and create a democratic style government. But most of China was falling to these warlords, and all these different warlords kind of carved out parts of China. And so it's in this situation that we start to see a growth of Chinese nationalism, especially after World War I. This was a reaction to the increased influence that Japan was having in China. And so the May 4th movement was a huge push amongst mostly Chinese students, their intellectuals that wanted to rid China of all this foreign influence. They also wanted to create a Western style democracy and restore order and stability back to China. And so during this interwar period, we gradually see the growth of the Nationalist Party in China, also known as the Kuomintang. This was a group that advocated change. They wanted a democracy. They pushed nationalism. They were extremely successful in the urban areas of China at first, but had trouble controlling the regional warlords in the rural parts of China. Meanwhile, you also saw the growth of a Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party pushed for things like women's rights and equality. They pushed for socialism. They were against a lot of the more patriarchal aspects of China, especially things like foot binding. And so temporarily, Sun Yat-sen, the leader of the Kuomintang, and the Communist Party joined together against these foreigners and against these warlords to help reestablish order in China. And eventually they do. And so this is going to lead to the nationalist period of China. So following the Qing dynasty, you have this period of instability, and ultimately the nationalists would kind of win out. And under Chiang Kai-shek, also known as Chiang Jia-shi, they are going to reunify China. So after the death of Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek takes over, and with the help of the communists, restores order to most of China. However, even though they restored order, the nationalists really continued to struggle at reforming for the lower classes. The peasants continued to struggle in China. Famines and diseases continued to plague China. And once they had reestablished order, the nationalists turned on the communists and began attacking the communists in China as well. And Mao Zedong is going to become the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. And he's going to take his supporters, about 90,000 supporters, and move them to the northern parts of China in what's known as the Long March. They marched thousands of miles to the northern parts of China and set up kind of a state there in northern China. And going into World War II, we basically had this civil war emerging between the nationalists and the communist parties in China. Meanwhile, in Japan emerges from World War I as a global power, as really the dominant power in East Asia, and had acquired German territory in China and East Asia. They also would annex Korea as well, and really came to control parts of Manchuria as well. And their main goal of all of this was to seek out raw materials for their factories. Well, this prosperity was somewhat short-lived because Japan is hit especially hard by the Great Depression. In fact, their industrial output declines by like 50%. However, they were also very quick to recover. In fact, they recover faster than most Western nations, mostly because of government spending. The government really pushed industrialization. They spent a lot of money on public projects, and that helped kind of restore the economy. And so Japan was hit hard by the Great Depression, but they recovered relatively quickly as well. Meanwhile, one of the growing problems in Japan was the growing influence of the army. And the army becomes increasingly involved in government affairs. There were several military coups that tried to seize power. And even though these military coups were put down, gradually these military admirals began to play a bigger and bigger role in the affairs. And the prime minister of Japan becomes more militaristic as well. And so by the time we get to the 1930s, Japan has kind of transitioned into a dictatorship. And the government was kind of dominated by the military. And they shared a lot of similarities to fascism: strong nationalism, strong militarism, and a focus on tradition and kind of restoring traditional Japanese culture.